Today's topic is the UK cost of living crisis, and joining us for that are Labour peer Lord Glasman and political commentator Marina Purkiss. So welcome to you both.
Trouble with Europe is it's a union. You lose your autonomy fundamentally. I'm not saying that there weren't benefits. I'm not saying that, but fundamentally, you lost the freedom to govern your own state. So what you need, even outside the money, the kind of euro itself is crazy, where you have fiscal control but no monetary control. That's a model that will collapse. It's inevitable. And it's last thing. There's no way you can leave a central bank that's not accountable to anybody to manage monetary policy. So that will collapse, and I think quite soon. But even having law that was subject to the European Commission, which is not accountable, which is effectively equivalent almost to the public bureau in terms of accountability. No one's accountable. How can the kind of change that we're talking about that need radical engaging with the population can't happen if you are controlled from above and you can't make your own law?
But the European Commission only stepped in such a sort of tiny fragment of fraction of situation. So for example, and if they did, it was to do with trade matters.
This is the world I lived in, and it didn't protect the workers because it's too complicated. They didn't understand it, so they couldn't look after themselves. The legislation is full of holes. It was pure badly drafted, and the holiday pay bits just never worked. I signed out right at the beginning. The law was actually faulty. So you've got people at the top, bureaucrats, making law that doesn't work, that completely affected what we could do. So what I'm saying is, if we're going to create a new vision, a new settlement, a new paradigm, you can't do it when you have these people at top who are at the top of the system, and you can't change your laws unless they approve it.
But Philip, then you campaigned to leave because you didn't like that. Now I believe that you are a good person. You did want the best for your employees, and you could have been trusted to say scrap the time directive that you didn't like, and you would have, with your own sovereignty, you would have implemented something similar that was more beneficial to your company, to the employees. But what we have now is we're in the process of having a government that want to have their bonfire of EU laws, within which sits the working time directive, and they want to scrap that, and you leave then that open to unscrupulous bosses who do not care about their employees. And I love that you've got this vision of the people would be really kind and they're like you, but they aren't.
You're raising the right question. I'm not talking about freedom from responsibility. You're completely right. I'm just saying the big state, certainly not the big union of another state, is not the way to hold people accountable. It's hard enough to hold people accountable just in the UK without the EU control. You can't. It's too complicated. It's too cumbersome. So what Morris and I are working on is a system that is not that is distributed. We talk about a civic trust, which hopefully we can come on to talk about, which is accountable, has to be accountable, but it's to citizen assemblies. We're not talking about no accountability. You're completely right. It's great you need accountability, but people need to understand issues and actually deal with human beings that they know, that they connect with, and look after them. And that doesn't happen with Europe, and it doesn't happen even with the UK. And I'm not arguing with you that the mess that we've had for the last few years it's farcical, and we've achieved nothing with the freedom. But that doesn't mean there was a mistake. It just means that we got it wrong.
My view is that it was a mistake to do it without even the semblance of a plan to action, because I don't sell my house without another house to move into, and it feels like that's what we've done. And now I'm out in the cold, and I'm struggling. And still, even your view with the civic trusts and the assemblies, which sound beautiful. Let's be honest, it does sound like a utopia. We are so far removed from being anywhere near that. And for example, there's not even a test bed of this. There's something like a little Freeport test bed, they've done. So the time in which it will take to get to even a test bed before you consider rolling that out, if indeed it is successful, we're talking potentially decades, centuries. And then everything that happens in between then, because we have removed ourselves from that, my opinion, safety net framework of the European Union will mean for British people that they see deregulation that harms them in terms of their workers' rights and their employment rights and our environmental rights. We've seen it already with the impact on our sewage, and the massive inconvenience that we're seeing, but also the impact of it on everyday living because of the supply chain issues and the added cost to absolutely everything from your supermarket shop to a pair of shoes that you might buy.
But no, just take out that you're right. I'm a pragmatist. I've built fortune in large businesses, and I know the problems of dealing with big problems. So we employed more than 100,000 people a year, so I had to deal with big problems. And ideally, you want a plan, but in the real world, it doesn't work like that. It's the way we do it in the real world. Is we use agile techniques. So we're familiar, which is Scrum, which means you have to start with a vision, and then you have to build a minimum viable product quickly. Okay. But you can't have the days of spending 2 years using detailed specification for a system are gone. The world is far too complicated for that. So, but what I think you're missing is the people voted for Brexit. I know it was tight, but you have to recognise that they went against both political parties were supportive of Remain fundamentally, and in fact the business world. So that they went against everybody. They went by themselves.
Philip, I think we need to be really honest about why people did that. I am surprised it wasn't far greater than 52%, because the electorate were, many of them weren't, many of them knew exactly what they were voted for, but a large swathe of them were lied to. They were promised the earth. They were promised that their NHS was going to be like the equivalent of entering a sanctuary. They were promised that their bills would go down. They were promised cheaper food, cheaper electricity, cheaper gas, cheaper shoes, everything was going to be cheaper, right? They were promised control of their borders. There was this nationalistic sort of angle to it. It was going back to the days when we were proud to be. So there was everything was wrapped into it. And then don't forget the manipulation that happened via Cambridge Analytica online. So all of those swing voters, right? So yes, and some people, they didn't even know what they were voting for. It was a 2 fingers up to David Cameron.
I agree.
Right. And so to try and then interpret that as people voted for Brexit when no one even knew what it entailed.
I was involved in a very different campaign, which was local town halls, mainly across from the northeast down to the Midlands, really intense conversations. And what it was a rejection of globalization, was a rejection of this treaty-based, anti-democratic global system where you could... That was what I was honestly, completely. Who are we going to be answerable to? How can we get rid of them? These were the questions that came up. And obviously there was no accountability within the EU structures. And it's also important to say that if you look at the civic unrest in France, the levels of inflation there, the EU, it's a kind of, they can't move. They seem to be stuck in an endless cycle of violence and stagnation. The really scary thing is the way things are going in Germany at the moment, as I say, with the rise of the AfD and the far right politics, and thank God that's not happening here. But what we've got the possibility
it's
now
happening here. I think to say that it's not happening here is to say it's not.
No, I'm saying that we haven't got an equivalent of the AfD or Le Pen moving around. That's what I'm saying, or Maloney, or even Maloney.
Yeah, okay.
No. So these are all going on in EU countries. If you look at what the Overton window is shifting much to the right in Europe, is what I'm saying. Whereas we seem to be swinging more to the left. I'm just saying these are the realities. Is that the EU does not provide that, and in terms of inflation, deindustrialization, and wages, it's roughly comparable data going on in terms of the EU in here. But the difference being is that we have the freedom now to actually think of alternative economic models, a way of strengthening democracy that would have been impossible to do within the framework of Lisbon, Maastricht.
You could have thought of them. You could have done that. You could have modelled them.
This is the genuine beauty of living in a democracy, is that we can now work through and come up with new institutional arrangements that are literally illegal under the framework of Lisbon and Maastricht.
Unfortunately for now, we're going to have to leave it there. thank you so much, everyone. That was a really thought-provoking discussion, really, really interesting. Thank you to Philip, of course. Thank you to Lord Glasman and Marina as well. And thank you for watching, and we will see you on the next one.